You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast, and this is episode 102. If you can believe it, 102 episodes of the Doctor Is In podcast, and we want to thank each and every one of you who have been, downloading us on iTunes or listening to us on our website. We're very much appreciative of the fact that you guys are taking time out of your day to listen to us.
Yeah, and a lot of good feedback, too, on the podcast, and we try and keep everything relevant and something that the podcast would be very, very practical for, just keeping people healthy. That's our goal.
Well, and a lot of times the podcast episodes are kind of shaped by the questions that we get asked throughout the week. It allows us to really sit down for a little longer period of time and discuss some of the stuff. So again, we appreciate all the feedback that we're getting. On today's episode, we want to talk about something that, came out that was very interesting that didn't really get a lot of press. And you'll see why in a minute, because it's one of those things that, really should have gotten a lot more news and didn't. It was a study done by the Cochrane. The Cochrane Institute is a I'll read you right from their website who they are and why it matters, why it's important. It's always interesting. So the Cochrane Systematic Review is an objective review of all evidence around a question. That's who they are. So what they do is they ask a question, then they go search for all of the studies that fit the question they're asking. So essentially, if you were to draw a circle and that circle is the question, any study that fits that question would go into the circle, and anything that doesn't, they don't look at. And then what they do from inside the circle then is they look at the evidence. They ask a question, does the evidence support that question or not? And so, it's a very detailed process. They do a lot of legwork, a lot of research.
And they're not bought and paid for by the big pharmaceuticals.
No, they're not, because their Cochrane review of statin drugs, for example, made some news as well. And yeah, they're a systematic review, which is, again, is a tremendous way of looking at the evidence that's in front of us. So one of the questions that they wanted to do, which I found interesting, actually has to do with whether or not there is sufficient evidence to show that whole grain diets have an impact for good on cardiovascular health. Right? Because, let's be honest, cereal manufacturers, they've had, they partnered up with the American Heart Association, that healthy heart check mark. The American Heart Association talks about they promote whole grains for heart health.
Yeah, you see it on your box of Cheerios, right? They have a heart on the box.
Yeah, it's good for the heart.
And they're heart healthy.
And then, they market it, contains so many servings of whole grains, right? Mm-hmm. Cochrane Review, they went through and they asked the question, is there enough evidence to support the fact that whole grain diets are good for the heart? And do they have any effect on major cardiovascular risk factors such as blood lipids and blood pressure? That's what they did. They went about and they asked the question, they did the research, and they came out with the Cochrane Systematic Review on that. So here, this is I'll read you the conclusion of the systematic review from them. This is what they said. There is insufficient evidence from RCTs. And again, RCTs are on the scale of research. They're on the, more of the gold standard, right? So they're saying there is insufficient evidence from RCTs of an effect of whole grain diets on cardiovascular outcomes or on major cardiovascular risk factors such as blood lipids and blood pressure. Trials were at unclear or high risk of bias with small sample sizes and relatively short-term interventions, and the overall quality of the evidence was low. There is a need for well-designed, adequately powered RCTs with longer durations assessing cardiovascular events as well as cardiovascular risk factors. Mm-hmm. Bottom line, they're saying that the evidence isn't there. But a whole industry was built on that.
Yeah. And I always say the reason they put heart on boxes of cereal is because if you keep eating this, you're going to have a heart attack. They're saying, Cochrane, there's no evidence that they're beneficial. What they didn't look at is whether there was any evidence whether they were detrimental to your heart. And, of course, clinically, we've been saying this for years in a clinical fashion, and we just see patients. You and I have discussed this in the past. Cochrane is looking at review studies, and that's good for them, right? But clinically, we know if I want to change a profile of a patient's blood pressure, blood lipids, their triglycerides or their, I don't care so much about their cholesterol, but let's say you want to get cholesterol down. Clinically.
Well, if you want to get cholesterol down, you want to shorten their lifespan.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody wants to shorten their lifespan, then get your cholesterol down because they've shown that.
Yeah. Again, even today in the clinic, and just to get off a little sidetrack, I saw a lady in the office today, and she was on 40 milligrams of a statin drug, Crestor. She had been on it for years, and I said, well, I'm looking at your blood work. Your blood work is like your cholesterol has been normal for a long time. Why are you still taking it? I don't know. Like she didn't know. But had every symptom of side effects, including memory loss, muscle pain, muscle wasting, all the symptoms of statin drugs, and yet because she never questioned her doctor, and, the doctor should be shot. I hate to be negative, but you know what? Like, it's crazy. Anyway.
Now, in the world of podcasting, it's so funny we got to say these disclaimers. You didn't mean that literally.
No.
Because we're always going to get somebody, and we get a lot of listeners, we're always going to get somebody and say, is Dr. Martin...
I didn't mean that.
Yeah, is Dr. Martin promoting violence? No. Figuratively... figure of speech wise. But listen, I used to treat a lot of sports injuries. I used to have people coming in, patients coming in, and they were sore. Muscles were sore, aching, bothering them all night long. And, I asked them a few questions, and then it became pretty clear that, especially this is what they would sound like. They'd come in, they're like, you know what, I'm my legs are sore, my arms are sore, I'm sore, but I don't really even remember doing anything. I mean, I nothing's changed, and they're sore as if they've, started a massive exercise routine. They had a hard time getting in and out of the car, and this was common. So then, I asked them a few questions, and then sure enough, find out that they're on a statin drug, and sure enough, they had no pain prior to getting on the statin drug, and then they saw, of course, I'd say, well, listen, you got to go tell your doctor you're getting a side effect of statin drugs, and it's causing you muscle pain. Muscle pain does not just show up all by itself.
No.
You don't just all of a sudden can't get out of your car, right?
And what's your heart?
Well, and that's another thing. The heart's a muscle.
Seems to me it's a muscle, right?
One of the negative things about statin drugs has to do with the fact that it depletes your body of coenzyme Q10. And your muscles need coenzyme Q10 to be healthy and contract properly. And
your mitochondria, which are your little battery packs in your body, do not work without CoQ10, right? Your CoQ10 is an important something that your body produces, but you deplete it with the use of statin drugs. So anyway, look, we don't want to rail so much on that. We're talking about whole grains, and we're talking about nonsense that for years we've been telling people, don't live on cereal. It's the choice of champions of...
and that's the interesting thing, because the Cochrane, what they actually did, if you go read what they did their question on, it's the title of the thing was Whole Grain Cereals for Cardiovascular Disease, right? And they're saying that there's no evidence of that eating whole grain cereal is going to help your heart. But that's going to lead us into the second thing we want to talk about here. Now, you and I, we have said this multiple times in previous podcasts, and we write about this a lot in our newsletters, is that heart disease or high blood pressure is really a result of high circulating insulin, right? They got high circulating insulin. Heart disease is a symptom of high circulating insulin for a lot of people. One of the things that happens is when you are consuming whole grains for your heart, which the evidence shows doesn't work, is you're raising your insulin levels, because if you go look up the insulin load of whole grains, they're higher. I mean, they cause an insulin reaction. They cause you to secrete insulin. They're not low insulin food. You're eating these things and it's raising your insulin levels. Now, which brings us to another, something else that caught our attention right around the same time as this study, the Cochrane review came out. There was another one, and I'll just read you some of the headlines from this, because it says this: 1/3 of Americans are headed for diabetes and they don't even know it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the first thing. And that's, we would say absolutely. That's true. How many people do you see in a daytime that are headed for diabetes, or they're essentially diabetic, but they don't know it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's common. So it also says this, roughly 1/3 of Americans, are more than 84 million people, have pre-diabetes, and most have no idea. There's a few reasons for that. And again, the advice of eating whole grain cereal for heart disease has contributed to that number. There's no question. And look at one of the other studies that we just wrote about that goes along the lines of that, of the amount of people that have pre-diabetes and don't even know it, is there was a study done that recently, and this is not the first study to show this, by the way, high normal blood sugar. So they have normal, by all intents, they're normal, but if they went to the doctor would say it's normal, but it's getting a little high. That's it. You're not diabetic. You just have a little bit higher than normal blood sugar levels. What they found in the study, which is really interesting, is that even though they're quote unquote healthy levels of glucose, it still is causing the brain to atrophy faster. The brain is wasting faster. Look at what we just talked about so far. For the longest time, you had the American Heart Association telling people to eat whole grain cereals for heart health.
Yeah.
No evidence.
Get away from eggs.
Yeah, no evidence for that.
Yeah.
Then whole grain cereals will raise insulin, which will cause elevated insulin levels, which will cause a fight between high blood sugar levels and all that kind of stuff. And it leads to the brain wasting faster. So you have people that their risk of heart disease goes up. They get blood pressure. They get all these things. At the same time, their brain is wasting faster. Their brain is shrinking faster. One of the things that happens as we age is our brain shrinks.
Yeah.
It shrinks. And the faster it shrinks, the worse off we are. Now, there are a few lifestyle factors that can also shrink our brain. Research has shown that smoking will have people that smoke have a smaller brain.
Yeah.
It's not an insult, calling somebody a small brain, but research shows that they have a smaller brain. Obesity shrinks the brain. Yeah. But again, obesity is just a symptom of insulin.
Yeah.
It's not that obesity shrinks the brain. It's the cause of obesity, which for a lot of people is insulin. Insulin will shrink your brain.
Yeah.
High blood pressure will shrink your brain, right? So there's a lot of factors that can cause our brains to prematurely shrink as we age. And it turns out that having quote unquote healthy blood sugar levels will also shrink your brain faster because they're a little higher than they should be. But that's not the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not the problem. Even though their blood sugar levels are a little bit elevated, the real problem, and blood sugars are a lagging indicator. What we mean by that is if you have high blood sugar levels, but they're not quite diabetic high, that's an indication you have an insulin problem. You've probably had one for a long time.
Yeah.
So again, really higher than normal blood sugars, but they're still healthy, within the healthy range. All that's telling you is you got high insulin levels. You have high circulating insulin.
Yeah.
And that's causing your brain to shrink faster. So those are just a couple of studies, really that came out over the past month. They all tie in together.
Yeah.
They're all tied in together.
And we see it, right? We see it in the office all the time. And people that are, again, I think of a patient that I saw today where their memory isn't what it used to be, right? So there's a few things I look at in memory. I always look at their B12 levels, their serum B12, not their cellular B12, not so much their blood levels of B12, because your brain doesn't work without B12. But it's always, you get back to it's insulin resistance. You measure that and you see that their insulin is elevated, and yet their blood sugars, we do an old-fashioned test, which I like even better in terms of diabetes. I look for sugar in the urine. Right? That was the old way of looking for diabetes, but I still believe one of the best ways, because if you have sugar in the urine, you are 100% a diabetic. Now your insulin's not even working anymore because it's not taking that. Imagine you have an organ in your body that specifically his job specific is to take sugar out of your bloodstream. That's how, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, like in terms of how you cannot have extra sugar in your bloodstream.
Your
body
is
does
toxic.
Yeah, sugar it's cancer in your blood vessels. It is heart disease in your blood.
Yeah, your
kills
body
your blood vessels.
tightly regulates your blood sugar levels because too much it's toxic. It's not. It's unhealthy. You can't have too high blood sugar levels and you can't have too low. They're both dangerous. So your body regulates that.
And yet that's all they look at is blood sugar levels. And yet your body is doing everything it can to regulate your blood sugar levels. So what is a better indicator? It's your insulin levels.
Yeah, definitely insulin.
How much insulin is circulating? And this is why, when we talk about our program on the Serial Killers Revisited, we talked about how to regulate that insulin. Right? We're insulin.
Which is the best way to eat for cardiovascular disease. Yeah. It's the best.
And whole grains ain't part of it.
No. Again, one of the things that happens is as we age and we continue to eat crappy foods, crappy carbs, we lose the ability to tolerate carbohydrates. We go from a point where we can handle carbohydrates to a certain extent to the inability to tolerate them at all. And diabetes is it's a allergy of carbohydrates. Your body cannot tolerate anything that's going to cause the blood sugar levels to shoot up at all. Your body overreacts. It makes a ton of insulin. It goes crazy. They can no longer tolerate carbohydrates. Yeah. See, one of the nice things is if you approach heart disease or diabetes and really go after the cause, which is high insulin, then you just have to eat in a way that will lower insulin, that keeps insulin levels low. And whole grain cereals don't do that.
No.
I mean, are there some whole grain cereals that are better than others? Yes, absolutely. But if you are a diabetic, you've lost your ability to tolerate carbohydrates. So it's like, do you want me to punch you in the right arm or the left arm? You don't want to get punched, period. Yeah. That's the problem with cereal. If you're not diabetic and you are insulin sensitive, then yes, there are some cereals that are better than other cereals. Yeah. But if you're diabetic, cereals ain't your friend. Yeah. You've lost that ability until you fix it. We see people all the time who reverse diabetes because diabetes is a disease of high insulin. Yeah. You fix insulin, you fix diabetes. You got to eat in a way to keep insulin levels low. Yeah. And that's why we developed that Serial Killers Revisited program, which is a low insulin or an insulin lowering program. And once you fix that, then you can go back to maybe eating some who knows? You got to see how your body responds after. But that's the issue. So, we looked at this study. The first one, that caught our eye was that Cochrane review showing again. So listen, if you're listening to this episode and you're at you have a risk factor for heart disease and a dietitian or your doctor's telling you to eat whole grain cereal, they're not up on research. Well, and listen, it doesn't work. Here's what's going to happen because we've seen this enough times. This is what happens. You go see your family doctor and you're at a little bit of a risk. Your blood pressure is getting high and you're at a little bit of a risk for heart disease. So what happens? He tells you to get rid of salt, which is a huge, massive mistake. Mm-hmm. He tells you to start eating more whole grain. So you start to do that. But then guess what happens over time? Then your sugar levels start to get funny. Then, you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic. You better get on insulin.
Yeah.
And then
or metformin. Right?
Yeah, and then it just starts that medical merry-go-round.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're all part of metabolic syndrome.
Yes.
And they're all part of high circulating insulin that never goes away, your cells. And so I always like your term reverse engineering. Let's go the other way. Here's what you have. Let's go backwards and see what caused it and how to correct it. And it's amazing how people, when they understand that that's my issue, I can fix it. And without medication, with a change in your diet.
Well, and that's what, and we'll end with this. One of the frustrating things with diabetes is if you go look at all the association websites, they label it as a progressive disease, meaning it's going to get progressively worse.
Yeah. Well, if you manage it, absolutely.
If you follow the advice that's out there, yes, it's going to get progressively worse. Yes. There's no question.
And you always say diabetes never ends well.
No, it doesn't end well.
You're on the Titanic, and it's just a matter of time. You're going to hit that iceberg. You're not veering course. You're not changing. You're just taking more and more and more and more meds.
Well, and listen,
it's amazing.
We see the eating plans that some patients are given by different people out there to manage diabetes, and it's just like so frustrating. Yeah. It's just don't have it. It's a simple understanding of what the cause. What's the cause? And of course, we talk about this every episode, and we'll talk about it every episode because it really...
Well, we're food people, right?
And it's high insulin. So again, if you're listening to this podcast and you're at a risk for cardiovascular issues, cut out the whole grains. Cut them out. Your body can't tolerate them, and start eating lower insulin foods. So listen, we're past our time, so we want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you're listening to us on iTunes, we would love if you would leave us a quick review. We would appreciate that tremendously. Also, you can subscribe to us right within the app on either your iPhone or your Android. You can just subscribe to us and automatically get notified whenever we have a new episode. And if you're on our website listening and you're not a newsletter subscriber, then we would love you to just sign up. We give a lot of health information. We go through a lot of studies. We break them down. We give you practical.
We make it easy.
Yeah, we give you practical stuff. So again, we want to thank you for listening and have a great day.